Well, let's bring in Lorenzo Kamel. He is a professor of international history at the University of Turin and joins us now from Rome. Professor, thank you for joining us. The fact that they've given no timeline here, haven't identified any other third-party countries, what do you take from this?
That's most likely there is an impasse at this moment, but it's clear that history teaches us that you cannot win a war of attrition against geography. So in this sense, it's clear that Iran, notwithstanding this sanction and so on, is aware of the fact that there's a certain leverage. At the same time, it's also evident that Iran cannot completely close the Strait of Hormuz and the US cannot fully open it. So in this sense, third parties can play an important role. And in this sense, Oman and Pakistan efforts to engage Iran signal diplomatic attempts to stabilize this region, possibly using also US pressure on oil prices ahead of the midterm election. But that said, I think that the next step might be quite clear in the sense that if this sanction will really go ahead, as it seems, it's most likely Iran will strike Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So it's, in the sense, will try to feel the leverage to which I was referring to before.
So, Professor, can we look at this from a historical point of view? Do sanctions actually work? I mean, ultimately, Tehran has been subject to quite high levels of sanctions in the last few decades, and it's still being a major regional actor here. What more can the US do? And it takes ages for them to work, doesn't it, historically?
Yes, it's not a really original solution. Sanctions, according to the Lancet, sanctions from the US have caused 38 million deaths since 1970. So in almost all cases, these were US unilateral sanctions, meaning that they were not imposed by the United Nations. And these sanctions are never imposed against regimes that are considered useful to the US and their allies. And yet they are presented as acceptable measure. The first sanctions that were imposed against Iran were in 1979. So at the time, the Iranian students stormed the US embassy and took diplomatic hostages. So in this sense, that was the starting point. But let's always remember that that was the Iranian Revolution, not the Islamic Revolution. It became Islamic at a later stage. It was the Iranian Revolution and the most popular revolution in the modern and contemporary history, more than the French and the Russian Revolution. And why it was so popular, that revolution? It was so popular, so participated, because the US were interfering in this country. So following the coup against Mossadegh and through puppet regime of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, through the torture chambers and so on and so forth. So all this pushed millions of Iranians to strike back. At the time when these sanctions were imposed, Iran was the first buyer of US weapons at the global level. So if history teaches us something, is that if the US want to replicate with adjusting some things, the same pattern, the result won't be so much different.
Professor, very quickly, the thing is, this seems to be a further escalation by the US, no doubt. The Iranians will also up the ante. And every time this happens, the space for diplomacy gets smaller and smaller, does it not? How does this end?
Yes, first of all, there are many actors that have a strong interest in closing the window of diplomacy. So we have seen that there was a way, the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement, was certainly perfectible, was certainly not 100% somehow solving all the problems, but still was a pattern that would go in a direction. Now we've seen that the Trump administration was very, very keen in unilaterally going out of that agreement. And why so? Because there is a strong interest of having a clear target. And of course, the interest comes also largely from Israel. So the Israelis have a strong interest in that sense in attacking Iran and having this clear enemy, contrary to what many people think sometimes to have clear enemies from Hamas in Palestine to the Iranian regime and many others is very useful for certain actors. So diplomacy is something that is positive for some, but for many political actors, it's actually something that might be seen as dangerous.
Lorenzo Kamel, thank you so much, Professor of International History at the University of Turin there.